Welcome to Figure Eight, where we feature inspiring stories of women entrepreneurs who have grown their businesses to 7 and 8 figures revenue. If you're in the mix of growing a bigger business, these stories are for you. Join us as we explore where the tough spots are, how to overcome them, and how to prepare yourself for the next portion of the climb. I'm your host, Julie Ellis. I'm an author, entrepreneur, and a growth and leadership coach who co founded, grew, and exited an 8 figure business. This led me to exploring why some women achieve great things. And that led to my book, Big Gorgeous Goals. Let's explore the systems, processes, and people that help us grow our businesses to new heights. If you're interested in growing your business, this podcast will help. Now, let's get going. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Figure Eight. Today, I am joined by Carroll. Casey is a driven entrepreneur and a business strategist, communications professional, and a hospitality expert. So she brings a whole variety of skills to the table in her entrepreneurial ventures. And right now, she has 2 of them. She is the co-owner of Bold Women Brands, BWB, a holistic brand agency focused on women entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurship, and equity, and also Coray Kitchen, which is a restaurant in Delmar, New York. So that feels like it's going to be a really interesting conversation with different things. Casey has over a decade of extensive study and exploration in transformative leadership, energy and consciousness, contemplative practices in her professional pursuits. And she's the creator of Questions to Hold, which is a deck of cards that I personally love and adore. So I'm super happy to dive in with you and welcome, Casey.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so grateful to be with all the listeners today too.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. And I feel like this conversation's kind of long overdue because we've
Yeah.
known each other for quite a long time.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me about, I love the like eclectic path. I mean,
Mhm.
that's my
Yeah.
kind of history is very eclectic. And
Mhm.
I really am always interested in seeing how people end up in those spaces and what the exploration leads to. So what can you tell me about that for you?
Yeah, I've always said and advocated for taking the nonlinear path in life and in entrepreneurship and business and in all the ways. I remember one point in my career kind of where I found myself in San Francisco working at a large communications agency. And I was surrounded by folks who had gone up the path where they had, um, maybe studied PR and communications in school and had done the internships and moved through their career very intentionally that way. And it was amazing for them. And I found myself feeling like a lack of confidence because I found myself in this agency and I'm like, who am I? Like after school, I went to Denver and like dabbled in the arts and worked in the food industry and was studying leadership and development and kind of was all over the place. But all the while knowing that those explorations were really forming me and rounding me into the type of person and professional I wanted to be. So it's always been this nonlinear kind of path for me. And again, finding myself in the agency there, I had that moment of recognition and reflection of I'm still deserving to be here, although my path looks quite different. And actually, bringing the intersection of experience I had into something like that agency was essential to do the good kind of work I was doing inside of there. And then also that spirit, it's like that hummingbird pollinator spirit that I have of like always seeking knowledge in all these different ways and finding how we weave them together. I think that's really the entrepreneurial drive that's been the foundation for me, period. And then has since gone on, after I left the agency, that's when I started my first business, BWB, and recognizing that all those pieces, I needed them to be able to start the business, not just being a generalist, but being voraciously curious about so many aspects of life and work and how they could come. And I'll just say one other piece about that, which is that oftentimes in our work with other female entrepreneurs where we're supporting them, me and my business partner, Caitlin Fitzpatrick, but when we're supporting people, I often tell the story of what I call my year of possible selves. And this also came at a formative part of my career where it was kind of this choice point of like, okay, I'm doing all this work in coaching and leadership development and transformation. I'm also really loving all this work I'm doing in like communication strategy and business development. And then here I am studying energy and Reiki. Like, what are all these things? And so I always like to just say to different clients we work with to give permission of that exploration, what I called my exploration of year of possible selves of like, I'm going to, do Reiki and teach yoga, and I'm going to simultaneously facilitate leadership groups. And I'm also going to hold a full time job as a communications professional and just allowing it all to be an avenue of potential. And then, again, once that kind of phase ended for me, it all just merged together in what then became BWB and my path after that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the work that you've done at BWB is really beautiful, working with a real mix of women,
Mhm.
of female founders and people who are building businesses and making differences in the world.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, our goal with BWB again, so BWB, just as background, it is in its most essential category, like a brand and business development firm. But really, we're in the business of supporting transformation in business and in personal lives when it comes down to it. Some people often joke, we'll sign a contract and they'll start to do a website project with us. And then they're like, what's happening? You just changed our whole life. And we're like, that's the point. Like, it's not some backdoor scheme. It's just, it's not some backdoor scheme. It's just the essence of the work. What we see is, really work being for the clients we get to work in and with this devotional path and process of discovery, of purpose, of becoming, of social impact. And so we like to hold all of that for our entrepreneurs, for our founders, for our business um, leaders that we work with. That yes, we may be engaged in a rebrand or we may be engaged in a growth strategy or a product launch, but really, if we don't talk about some of the fundamental, more soulful elements of what's happening and why they're happening in the organizational body or in the individual, um, the strategy or the end product for us doesn't feel complete in the way that we like to pull through. So that's been again, all those elements that I bring and that Caitlin has brought into BWB with her background in improv and also leadership and um, new business development and startup and everything Caitlin's done all again makes what, even though at the end it just says business and brand development, it's that unique kind of underpinning of all of it.
Hmm. I think it's interesting how that thread of your own exploration and discovery process led you here where you now help others to kind of do the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, our journeys are deeply embedded with the journeys that we are going to support others with as well. So, if I hadn't walked through or wasn't currently still walking through the path, I don't really know that I would be the advisor that I for those type of people. Right? I have to understand and a lived experience and a personal matter. Otherwise, I'm just kind of reading the book and guessing the formula and offering something that's intellectual, but it's much more complicated. Anybody that's in business understands it's much more complicated than just the theory or what the mind can do. It's all the pieces that have to come. So, and I don't even think in good faith I could offer any counsel if I hadn't really gone through something myself.
Yeah. Well, and you're still exploring, which I also think, you're making that deliberate time to do the exploration, to continue the exploration.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas lots of people do spend some time exploring, then they dive into something and this sort of tunnel happens and you're, singularly focused, but that
Yeah.
kind of hasn't been your path.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't even know how to be singularly focused. I do a lot of work with a coach. Her name is Marin Golden, and her business is Seeds to Wholeness, but she focuses a lot on the Enneagram and helping. She does transformational and organizational consulting at large, but one of her specialties is in the Enneagram. And so, for folks who are kind of interested, or maybe have never even heard of it and want to dabble into it. I have found I've been able to unlock a lot about myself and my own leadership and also how we relate to clients through understanding my Enneagram profile, which is a 7. So to your point, Julie, a 7 is called the enthusiastic visionary on the in the Enneagram, which makes a lot of sense in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of having no ability to have a singular focus because it's
It
all about
actually explains why I like you because I'm a 2. And a
Ah,
2
yes.
yeah, and a 2 is often, uh, like, good complement to a 7 as the helper and that stable kind of, you know,
Yeah, that's
builder.
exactly right. Actually, when we've been bringing the Enneagram into our coaching relationships because oftentimes actually I as a coach am most of service to twos. And that is on purpose, twos and sevens. But that is through the Enneagram makes a lot of sense in terms of the complementary way that we can enliven and balance each other in those kinds of ways. So it's like twos may seek out an enthusiastic visionary to unlock those parts of themselves or help them express, and then vice versa. But I also have a two in my, they call it a tri type. So I'm a 7-1-2. So I also understand that part of it, but not to go too in the weeds of the Enneagram, but I do recommend anybody to kind of go check it out a
Explore
little
it.
further.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll put a link to some Enneagram exploration in
Yeah.
the show notes because I would agree with you. I found it to be like I've done a lot of sort of assessment instruments over the
Mhm.
course of time, and I have found it to be one of the most revealing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like we just did a big rebrand project with an architecture firm in Chicago, and there were multiple team members, there were multiple components of the project, and so we actually kicked off the project with a Enneagram session with all of us so we could understand how I could be the best project lead for them, creative advisor through the process, strategic advisor, and then they could also contextualize and understand how my feedback and counsel may show up for them. It led to, we finally just launched, and it led to a really successful process because, again, not only did we choose to work with each other based on values and quality of work and alignment in other ways, but it was like, "Oh, okay, we're committed to this shared relationship and how we can understand each other to get the best product and also make the process feel good." Oftentimes it's overly focused on the end product without thinking about like how are we carrying each other through the process.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a really interesting part because I think often the sort of consulting relationship can run into friction
Mhm.
because, scope didn't get fully understood. There's people walk away with different impressions and
Right,
understanding where those might come into play can be
right.
really helpful.
Yeah, right, and, like, why, so then I can understand everybody has different levels of information processing or how they like to receive information, and then so I can know ahead of time, like, "Oh, okay, this person may actually need more of the details than," and may need to have more of that explanation through a visual. Okay, I can be able to walk through the contract that way. Again, it's really about just meeting each other the best we can with the knowledge we have versus just assuming that whatever process we have in place is going to make sense for everybody and vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
So now you've got another business. Let's talk about the restaurant a little bit because I mean that's a very different business from the agency, and also living in like opening a restaurant in a small place, the community building, the things that go along with making a success of that. What led
Yeah,
you down that path?
Well, again, it's that little hummingbird inside of me. And the food industry was my first job. I started off as like a busser in a small Italian restaurant in my hometown. And I think once you catch the bug of the food industry and the spirit of it, which it always captured me, being able to feed people, take care of people, love people, show people a special time, even from that age, I kept trying to do other things in my career and I'd always come back to it. Even the agency I was talking about that I worked in San Francisco, it was in food marketing and comms. Anytime I tried to kind of venture into, you know, just doing communications or just doing coaching. It's like I came back into food in one dimension or another. And my husband is a chef, so we met each other out in San Francisco, and when I was out there in that agency. And he is a chef, and it was always a long time dream of his. So I believe firmly in business partnership. So one thing to name is my first business, BWB, is through partnership with Caitlin. And this business, Coray Kitchen, is in partnership with my husband. And I find something so deeply affirming and valuable about being in business partnership with somebody. So I don't think I ever would have opened a restaurant on my own. It was not my dream alone, but it was our shared dream, and something that I knew I could really support him in realizing in a new way. So we've had the restaurant for about a year and a half now, and it's a whole different animal from the agency. Our agency is remote team. It's comprised of a small team across the U.S., primarily North America, more broadly. And this is like brick and mortar, small town where I grew up. Actually, like literally on the street that my grandma and my mom were raised on. My dad was raised on the neighborhood away from there. So there's something truly special about my values of community and belonging, and then getting to express that in a really different format and medium with the restaurant. I will say balancing two businesses with two small children has brought me to task, I think, with that seven part of myself, and um, that hummingbird part, where actually it's been so humbling to be in a place where I'm ready to kind of like not necessarily pull back, but I'm satiated. There's no need for the continuous what's next, or that hunt or that hungriness that I've always had in myself. Having the two expressions, I find my hungriness coming back for more internal time, more time for reflection, more time to just come home and be with my children, and be normal with it. So, sometimes I think having the two had to stretch me to the point where I realized I start to think more deeply about what's important for me in the long term of my legacy.
Hmm. And it is that piece, like we all have like seasons. And so the
Mhm.
season you're in right now, like I'm sure that at another point in time, that hummingbird will come back and
Yeah,
want to lead you somewhere else.
yeah,
Because that's sort of the innate piece within you. But
yeah.
it's so important to appreciate also the place you're in now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, as I'm saying, it's coming back, but it's in these more like, um, less about the external production or creativity, and it's more those like quieter parts where it's coming back and just looking for more time to read a book, and like get back into the body, and get back into time to be with the kids out on a nature walk or something like that. So it's there, but it's shifting. And I've actually talked with a few other women. I'm 40, turned 40 this year, and I've talked with some other women business owners, and I think I'm on the younger cusp of that. Some of them are, maybe 10 years older than me, but about this point where then it becomes about who I am again, and turning inward versus like this full external expression, which again, it's all interconnected and ebbs and flows, but I am just noting it as an interesting like shift that's happening in the entrepreneurial journey.
And it's so interesting because I've reached this place now where my kids are all in their 20s. And
Mhm.
so have really felt that shift as they kind of step into their own and like, seem like they're getting launched and getting off into their own things. It opens a different door, right? And
Yeah.
so it's interesting. Transitions and places are always kind of interesting explorations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And like the Marin, who the coach that I work with, we leverage the Enneagram to talk about that of like not that any of this isn't my soul work, because all of it is my soul work, but there's, like, other parts of my soul now that are, like, younger parts where I used to do poetry or creative writing and all these pieces where I'm like, "Hmm, what are these coming back on board for, and where is that bringing me down the road? Is writing coming back in my life?" Or, all those kinds of things, and not trying to overly, uh pin it down just yet, just getting curious about what's showing up and what that means for me in this next era of the career path.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is, that exciting. I think we can't always look outward and reach and reach and reach, right? So looking inward, it becomes an important part of the journey,
Mhm,
and valuing that. I mean,
mhm,
I think I have not always valued that.
mhm. Yeah, and I know you mentioned the questions to hold deck that we have and the process that we have. But questions to hold is yay! That's a beautiful design by
It
Kelly
is a
Stengel.
beautiful design.
Yeah, Kelly Stengel was a designer with us, and she did that design intuitively. So, we that whole process was a little bit of intuitive, and how it started was in coaching relationships many years ago, about 10 years ago. I started coaching people one on one, and at the end of the coaching call, they'd be like, "So, what's my action step?" And I was like, do I have to be a good coach and give them an action step? Like, there was this part of me that was resisting that, and I really, really realized why, and what I started to quote assign was a question to hold. And I said, rather than, okay, yeah, we could like taskmaster this, and I could give you 10 tasks to take care of between now and the next coaching call. But that's not the kind of accountability I wanted to offer my clients. And so I said, what if we just opened up a question to hold? And that would be something that emerged in the conversation, could be as simple like, am I happy? Or it could be something like, do I have enough? For example. And they seem simple on the surface, but when you really, if you really kind of like take that practice to heart and take a full week and really just hold that question, not trying to answer it, just being really curious about it and asking yourself over and over, like, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I happy? As a process, it reveals so much to us, about so many things that may or may not be related to work. But what I found in doing that with coaching is then they'd come into the next session and it would be like a profound shift or an insight came through or something transformative, as you said, like really taking the interior world into consideration and being like, I know we were just building this growth strategy, but I'm recognizing that it's more in line with my ego, or it's about something more aggressive than I'm interested in. And actually, what I want is X, whatever it was. So, that questions to hold practice has been a core part of my own practice, what we share with clients, and then became a deck, a few years ago to give to people to kind of really have something physical and tangible to be in that remembrance of not to just steamroll ahead and bulldoze ahead and really invite into your leadership this questioning of and constant dialogue with your life, basically, of like, what are we doing here? and and is it what we want to be doing?
Yeah, it's like as entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time doing.
Hmm.
We have goals, we have plans, we have task lists and ways we're getting there, but we don't always spend time just being.
Hmm.
And to
Hmm.
me, that's what this deck really makes me think about is
Right.
like taking some time to spend in the being.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do I
Yeah,
want to
because in the
be, and how does
being,
that reconcile then with how I go into the world as a doer?
yeah, and in the being, again, it's like it sometimes for people it feels counterintuitive. It's like, okay, okay, just tell me what to do, or like what's the next step, right? I get that. Totally. I can relate to that. Um, but in the being is the next step, oftentimes. And it's a slower process or it's a quieter process. Um, and and maybe a little bit more nuanced than just like what's the next step logistically to get me there. And again, it's a combination of both. In business, we have to be doing both. But I think it's that being part that we're hoping to take more of a stand for. because that is actually where some of that essential information is, that gets overrided. And we don't want to be 10 years down the road and be like, oh no, I never listened to that part. And now, in hindsight, like that was telling me all these things all this time. And so I think if we can just build the forward momentum with that part of ourselves, we'll get, you know, maybe somewhere different and somewhere more fulfilled in the end of it.
Yes, with intention.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it
exactly.
comes to like, how do you, and I mean, I can say, I think that my work with Big Gorgeous Goals really came out
Yeah.
of being a doer and not
Mhm.
spending enough time being. And then when I had to spend time being, I did not know what to do with myself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
exactly, and I hear that a lot. I mean, my father was a business owner and an entrepreneur, and that's kind of what I grew up around, and I really was inspired by seeing what he was able to do. And then retirement was like a trickier phase because it was like all this focus on providing for the family and growth and external motivation, which was amazing, and he's incredible. But what happens when that feels like it's not being met in the same way for us? I think a lot of people can relate to that. And so we want to hold on to an identity that is more more complete, I think, than just what we're accomplishing or achieving in that way. And I remember when we were working together on Big Gorgeous Goals in your way, and reading the book and getting familiar with your work, I thought a lot about that for myself. Again, this was a few years ago, so I had like this I still had more a stronger kind of like entrepreneurial drive in that way of like, yes, what's like bigger? Where do I want to go? How am I encouraging myself to get out of my comfort zone and not be blocked by anything and really look into that big, vast possibility for myself? And now, as I've over the last couple of years, I've really thought about my big, gorgeous goals, including a lot more things than I originally was including in that thinking, especially um, in terms of my commitment to my children and what I want that to be, my commitment to just like my life, like being in my life, like there's so many other ways now where before when I was reading your materials thinking like, oh yes, I have all these big gorgeous goals and what do I want to do? And it was very, oh, 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 yeah, yeah, yeah. Idea, 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 idea. And I feel a little bit more humbled in that process now of like, what is a big, gorgeous goal for me that includes all of all of it?
Mhm. Yes, and I do think they are about life, work, like all the
Mhm,
pieces coming together
mhm,
for that big
mhm.
overarching how you want to be in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that makes, for me, and I know we've talked about this differently, that makes like growth and scale, it changes it changes my trajectory of it and my relationship to it. Not that I don't want to have it, but in a way of like I'm redefining that, for myself in a way that can feel sustainable and like my own definition of it.
Yes. Yeah, and it is these different phases of life that we come to where we redefine what it is
Mhm.
that we are able and want to do in
Mhm.
those different times.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like who knows where I'll be in 5 years or in 10 years or 15 years, like. And I think one of the things on Questions to Hold has also become a podcast that I host. But this season what we're focusing with people on is just the sheer reality and that can feel scary to some people about the way change is showing up in the world right now and in our individual lives. And so I think there's also in being in dialogue with all these different leaders about how they're holding change or how they're supporting people through change. It's really helped me just understand that this false notion of control, or anything that I've liked to enjoy, to believe, it's all just an illusion in these ways, and that wherever the road is headed, like how there are all these tools to be with change, and wherever it is 5, 10 years from now, I can still have these big, gorgeous goals you're talking about. I can still have all of this, but it's going to change. It already is. It's evolving now, and I can't know what it is, and that's okay.
No, and one of my observations right now is we really you've got to lean into the wind a little bit
Mhm.
because we can't simply protect what is because it can be like, the sand sliding through our fingers. And so we've got to be aware of what is and do what we can, but we kind of have to lean into the wind a little bit and look for what's coming.
Mhm. Yes, and I think, different people feel differently about leaning into the wind, with it, and, I know that even with, like, the work I've done in the spaces to like, in facilitation or in training to develop more skills here, like, even just, like, breath work or movement practice or, change philosophy, things like that. There's it's still scary, right? So, like, we still need conversations like this. We still need community networks, and just resources where we all are supporting each other and leaning into the wind, which I know is actually what Big Gorgeous Goals is about too. It's about not having them in isolation, but supporting each other in Big Gorgeous Goals and making it about, yeah, having a community effort with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a pretty big believer in that community is a big way in our lives to make things better.
Mhm.
That doing
Yeah.
anything alone is harder, whatever it is, whether it's a task or, something you're grappling with, but being doing it and closing in and doing it alone is not going to be as easy or successful as having community around you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, we'll say this uh to certain clients too, like being mindful and intentional about what community you're surrounding yourself in those kinds of situations, especially when it's something like striving for a big goal or moving into uncomfortable territory with yourself. It's like who's on that team with you becomes really important because it could be many things, but even like a small example is like when we're working with clients and let's say they're redoing their brand identity and they're going to share feedback. We say like just or they're going to ask for solicit feedback. It's like be mindful of who is giving that to you and what their role is. Again, not to say don't get feedback from people, but it's like who is that community? Who's on your team? Are they uplifting you and seeing you in that higher potential? And if not, what's the piece they're bringing to the puzzle that I think we can be intentional about who we're trying to surround ourselves with in these bigger times.
And asking the right questions
Mhm,
when you want feedback
mhm.
too,
Yes, exactly.
um, because you leave things too open and you're going to get feedback that isn't actually helpful to you.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's about we led a workshop, with a kinda large international organization at one point, Caitlin and I, and it was about being able to just identify the need and then name the need. I think that we forget how hard that can actually be to even be able to identify the need or the type of feedback we want, It's like that's the first step is like, well, first step is kind of like even understanding you might want feedback or you have a need that needs to get reconciled. And then once you have that awareness, it's like, okay, what is it though? Like really getting clear on like what it is that you're wanting support around. And then the next part of the process is like, how do you actually express that and name that and to who? And it's a lot more complicated, it's a lot more difficult and complicated than it sounds. People are like, oh, just say what you need. And I know for myself, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. It's been like a process, but it's a good process, I think, especially in anybody who's listening that's in any kind of like business leadership to really, really get articulate with your words and identifying what it is that things are kind of calling you forward.
No, I think it's so important,
Hmm.
and we don't do enough of it.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's the real truth. And because we don't do enough of it, it gets more and more difficult to access.
Yeah. Yeah.
Practice, right? Like so many things in life, we get better when we practice.
It's just building the muscle and not being scared to not know how to do it or like, any of those kinds of things. And again, that comes down to being around people who are holding you in a higher potential and with intention and goodness so that you can try on that muscle and not feel threatened by it.
No, exactly. Practicing and failing, like things not going exactly the way you want, and practicing again and doing it in that state where you do feel held.
Yeah, I in as I'm getting older, I recently found strength training, and when I'm in the gym, they always say like, "I want you to fail," and I'm like, "I don't want to."
I don't like failure.
You
Come
know, I'm like,
on.
"That's I don't like that." But it's been this really actually interesting thing, and even this morning in the process, like, they were having me do something, and it was like, I couldn't do it, and they were like, "We want you to fail, like, failure is a good thing," and I was just like, for, like, my nervous system and everything, and I think so many entrepreneurs would understand this, there is such a huge amount of pressure all the time, and I have the one I mentioned in the Enneagram, which is a perfectionist, and it's really internally driven on I don't critique others on that standard, I critique myself, and, there's so much pressure to always maintain public perception, always do it right, always be the step ahead, always never do the failure. So I was having this moment in the gym today when they were nicely nudging me to fail that I was like, I think this is really like just such a critical thing that like in my next phase that I'm just getting more and more comfortable with. And that goes into like facing the wind, like you're talking about, which is like, I don't know, there's so much wisdom in the failing, and that's super uncomfortable muscle for
Well,
me.
and it's kind of interesting too, though, because it's almost like if you can learn it on a physical level, can you
Right.
take it up to, your work and into your head in a way that maybe it's an easier gateway? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, exactly. But I was appreciative of this person reminding me of this morning, and I know that they love me, so it wasn't okay somebody telling me to fail. But I was like, "I'm so uncomfortable failing." And I was like, "Oop, I think I got a growth edge here that I gotta, really
Definitely.
address."
And I really feel like that's the story for all of us, is chasing those growth edges and seeing where they take us.
Yeah, 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 and laughing along with it, you know what I mean? Like, things can feel so serious all the time, and, I just think about that a lot, like, thank goodness for my children, because when my life feels so serious and my kids are like, "Do something really silly," and I'm like, "Oh, yeah." Like, life is just it's all just life, you know what I mean? Like, we just have to it's just what it is, and my kids are a huge, huge reminder of that for me every day of like, "Oh, yeah, don't get swept away in this stuff," you know? There's always just, like, the silly face or something like that that
Yeah,
they're gonna
and there's
do.
always a way to figure out what seems like the most difficult of problems.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Good. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It was a great
Thank you,
conversation,
Julie.
and
Mhm.
I'm so glad to reconnect.
Yes, I appreciate it. I appreciate for everybody listening, and thank you so much.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss any episodes. Figure Eight isn't just a podcast, it's a way of seeing the big, gorgeous goals of women entrepreneurs coming to life. If you're interested in learning more, you can find my book, Big Gorgeous Goals, on Amazon anywhere you might live. For more about my growth and leadership training programs, visit www.julieellis.ca to see how we might work together. Read my blog or sign up to get your free diagnostic. Are you ready for growth? Once again, that's www.julieellis.ca. When we work together, we all win. See you again soon for another episode of Figure Eight.